Welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing Hollywood and its influence around the world, this time in the form of a campaign that 81 very famous people have signed or gotten involved in to give over 100 million girls around the world access to education. Now I also want to focus a little on the finest cut, the best cut smug you can get your hands on, which is anything doled out of Hollywood. Let's face it, if the recent election cycle has taught us anything, is that actors can do the very best virtue signaling and come across as the best condescending fucks imaginable. I guess it helps that they're actors and they can pretend, but I'm pretty sure most of them were fairly sincere with their really poor acting. Anyway, the article is why we're here. Let's get into it. Celebs sign an open letter supporting girls' education, and it's another way Hollywood is using its voice for good. I do wonder if on that list of things that actors have done or gotten involved in that was for good, helping to annoy just enough people with those condescending YouTube videos to then go and vote Trump instead of Hillary, or then annoy the Electoral College or try and tell them who they should really be voting for when the constituents had already decided, or then trying to get it to go to Congress to then try and stop it, is on the list of good things that Hollywood has done recently. Now that aside, I am genuinely interested to see how Hollywood uses its influence to get education to those many, many girls around the world that do not have access to it. I'm also interested to know why they've singled girls out alone solely based on number, when surely all children, and this is very much like Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, when all children should take priority and you shouldn't look to elevate one over the other just because of gender. If we want to raise our children to be truly equal, then we must start at the very basic level, which is the very earliest stages of education. Over the last year, Hollywood has stood powerfully behind a slew of social and political causes, and they did a magnificent job opposing a tangerine with a toupee. Beyoncé paid tribute to the Black Lives Matter movement at the 2016 Super Bowl, which, while not doing much damage to Beyoncé and her career, because let's face it, why would it? She's black, she can use the race card to oppose any criticism. It's still harmful to her reputation to be associated with a movement that has been proven time and time again to not truly stand for the rights of black people, or care for the lives of black Americans. Proof of that would be the complete lack of addressing black-on-black crime and refusing to talk about such issues like that, but instead, like Beyoncé, using every opportunity to promote any kind of propaganda to deflect away from the core problems affecting black people in America. The narrative. Lady Gaga sang a poignant ballad to sexual assault victims at the Oscars, and at last week's Golden Globes, Meryl Streep gave an impassioned speech advocating for anti-bullying and inclusion. Is that what that was? Because I was listening to this speech 10 minutes before recording this particular segment, and upon first listening, all I could think was, why is she wasting her entire speech bleating on about Donald Trump? Because that's essentially what she was doing. It was an absolute waste of an opportunity to try and quell some of the ill feelings in Hollywood towards the idea of a Republican president. Now, 81 influential figures and celebs have signed an open letter supporting girls' education in poverty-stricken areas across the world. Okay, so now would be a good point to go to the one article linked on the page there to better understand what they are trying to achieve. 95 influential figures have signed on to support girls' education, and you're next. Now, I just want to pick at this 1 second. The original article says 81, which leads me to wonder whether or not 14 were added after, whether the original author of the first article can math, or whether they don't believe 14 people on the list of 95 influential figures aren't good enough. Now, on both articles, the number 130 million is mentioned. I have to query where this number comes from before we proceed, because when I go to places like UNICEF, the number is significantly less, and I have searched around for the number 130 million, but I'm struggling to find it. That's not to say it doesn't exist, and I'm not saying that number is inaccurate. I'm just saying that because they haven't provided sources to prove that that is in fact the number, which would be very hard to provide at the best of times, it must at least be an estimate. It's very hard to take it as a fact. Now, another thing I draw from this is that if the number of girls being denied access to education is so high, how low is it for boys? I would love to know that number, but you don't provide it, because if you do, that means you have to actually show a hard, solid number that will be of those being ignored because of sexism and how poverty is directly related to sexism. I'm not refuting that in other countries and other cultures, sexism has any impact on poverty. I'm not at all. But I am going to argue from the position that if you want to treat people equally and raise them in an equal society, you have to start at a basic level, which is primary education. Yes, the society further up is sexist, but if you're denying people lower down the opportunity to study, to learn, to treat people equally right at the bottom, you are breeding elitism, you are breeding classes, people thinking they're better than others because of education. And I'm not now going to start telling people what they should do to fix societies further up, because that's a whole different problem. Now, before I get any more sidetracked by this article instead of the main article, because this is basically a copy, or the original actually is a copy of this almost, with just a few marginal differences, we're going to go back to the original and continue before I get sucked into another ridiculous tangent that goes on for over 2 minutes again. Lady Gaga, Natalie Portman, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds are among those who are supporting the petition which urges global leaders to advance access to education for more than 130 million girls in various countries. While I don't want to focus on this point too much, I'm still questioning the number 130 million. Also, if you really want to achieve something, a petition will get you somewhere, but going to the UN itself and speaking would probably do you better. Not like Emma Watson, because that speech was a catastrophe, that he for she thing. Yeah, let's not go into that. I also want to point out one little thing in the language here, where it says urge instead of demand. There have been things in the past that I've covered where it's been demand this, we demand that, get it done, do it now, we will fight for it. No, this is urging. Urging is close to begging. It appeals to your emotion, your humanity, more than demanding would. It was drafted by campaigning and advocacy organisation One, which writes that women are among the most prominently impacted by a lack of their basic right to better schooling. The letter reads, "In the poorest countries, girls are denied it more often than boys. Education is vital for moving out of poverty. Every additional year of school that a girl completes increases her future earnings, which is good for her family, her community, and her country. Your education helped you to get where you are today, and it is in your power to help millions of girls to get theirs. Please act now with the right policies and the necessary funds. Show us that politics can work for the people, starting with the people who need it most." I thought it right to read all of that before dissecting certain areas of it that I am a bit skeptical of. The first thing that becomes apparent is that this is not the complete letter. This is only a few passages from the original put together. The original letter is on the one.org's website, and I can read it now. A letter to leaders. You couldn't be where you are today without a good education. But because poverty is sexist, 130 million girls across the world are denied this basic right. Indeed, if the number of girls out of school formed a country, it would be the 10th largest on the planet, bigger than Japan or Germany. All children deserve a good education, but in the poorest countries, girls are denied it more often than the boys. Education is vital for moving out of poverty. Every additional year of school that a girl completes increases her future earnings, which is good for her family, her community, and the country. We cannot afford to squander the potential of 130 million girls to cure diseases or end wars, invent brilliant technology or revolutionize an industry, or simply to access opportunity. We are coming together and uniting across our divides to get every girl into school and to make sure she gets a quality education once she's there. But we need you to do the same. Your education helped you to get where you are today, and it is in your power to help millions of girls to get theirs. Please act now with the right policies and necessary funds. Show us that politics can work for the people, starting with the people who need it most." Now, as I'm one of those people that believes context is important, so much so that I normally leave the original video I'm responding to in the description so people can go and watch it, I felt it right to read the entire original letter so you actually had the context and also all the information omitted in the article we've been covering. One of the most obvious things you find out is that if you click on the "Here's Our Open Letter" hyperlink, the slogan "Poverty is Sexist" pops up. Again, I'm not going to deny that, but I don't like the idea that to fix it, you have to elevate girls only. You seriously have to consider whether that's the right way of going about things, when surely the best way to treat people equally is to treat everyone equally. The society itself may be sexist, but if you're teaching everyone to treat people with respect, then surely you're not leaving anyone behind, which is actually what you would do, because there are going to be boys who don't have access to education. They're going to grow up learning that they don't have access to education because they were born with the wrong genitals. It feels like you're playing a game where you're taking it a generation at a time, so one generation of boys, or two, maybe more, will be left behind until the gender disparities, have been fixed. But it does mean that for a few generations there are going to be people left behind, up to a few, maybe more, who knows? It depends how much work you can get done by taking petitions to leaders, world leaders, global leaders. Another little thing before we continue. Based on the language of the original letter, this just reeks of feminist influence. But I'm not now saying that's what it is, merely that's how I'm seeing it. In a year where women's rights have been at the centre of a political debate, it's a message that rings loudly. Celebrities have often spoken out against the issues that riddle women's professional lives: unequal pay across genders, public scrutiny over their bodies and personal choices. There are important and necessary strides to be made there, but there are also issues to tackle that extend beyond Hollywood's reach. This is quite possibly my favourite part of the article, because it confirms the very narrow feminist lens and influence that went into it. In a year where women's rights have been at the centre of political debate. No. Women's rights have rarely been challenged. It's more that a female ran for US president and she lost. The message that rang loudly from that is that crime doesn't pay. The next part, celebrities have often spoken out against the issues that riddle women's professional lives. All of these are easy to debunk. Unequal pay across genders. When Hollywood is talking about that, you ignore it. Because Hollywood is a meritocracy. You had Jennifer Lawrence moan about the gender pay gap. A female that made $52 million that year. I didn't see any of her co-stars earn anywhere near that amount. A bit of a hypocrite, don't you think? Public scrutiny over their bodies and personal choices. Well, surely their body is a personal choice. It seemed fairly obvious. There are important and necessary strides to be made there. No, there aren't. You need to stop making these bold assertions that are so easy to debunk. I can get my 3-month-old nephew to say gender pay gap not real before a feminist does. One is giving the general public the opportunity to add their name to the list, which will be delivered to world authorities on March 8th, International Women's Day. Girls' education is a worthy cause, and it's compelling to see such influential figures paving the way. I wonder if one are going to do a similar campaign for Men's International Day, so that all the boys that were left off this particular campaign are then given the assistance they need, because otherwise they're just going to be ignored entirely, aren't they? Thank you all for listening.